Before we dive into the darkness of this story, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment if you think you can handle the truth behind the shadows. Because what you're about to see isn't just shocking, it's real and it's terrifying. The rain had stopped, leaving cloverleaf streets slick with a ghostly sheen under the dim glow of streetlights. Puddles reflected fraction images of empty houses, each window staring like a dark eye into the quiet Texas night. In a neighborhood where children's laughter usually echoed across the sidewalks, only silence remained, broken now and then by the distant wail of a siren. Inside a modest, pale blue house on the corner of Willow Creek Drive, a family's evening was about to unravel into something no parent could imagine surviving. Carlos Fernandez, 12 years old, had just finished his homework. His mother, Ashley, was folding laundry in the living room, humming softly to herself. The faint buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the wall clock were the only sounds keeping time in their calm suburban world. But calm in Cloverleaf, Texas was fragile, and it would shatter in the next few moments. Outside, in the shadows of the narrow alley that separated Ashley's home from her neighbors, Terry Rivera crouched behind the jagged outline of a wooden fence. His breaths came in short, shallow bursts, clouding in the chill evening air. His face was tense, eyes fixed on the illuminated window of his ex-girlfriend's home. For weeks, he had nursed the burning rage that had no place for reason, only for vengeance. Neighbors would later say they had heard nothing, no argument, no screaming, no warning. But the truth was far more sinister. Rivera had spent that evening with meticulous preparation. He had driven past the house multiple times, checking for cameras, for patrols, for anything that might interrupt the plan he had honed for months. Inside, Carlos stretched, unaware that outside, a storm of hatred waited. His mother, speaking on the phone with her sister, mentioned nothing of the tension that had been slowly creeping into their lives ever since the split. She had sensed it, a lingering presence in the back of her mind, but she could not have predicted the horror about to enter their home. At 8:17 p.m., Rivera raised his arm. The gun felt heavy in his hand, the weight a mixture of anticipation and grim resolve. He had been careful, methodical, ensuring the angle, the trajectory, the timing. In that instant, the world narrowed to a single point: the window, the boy, the shattered family he believed had wronged him. And then the shots rang out. Glass splintered across the floor in violent shards. Carlos's body dropped to the ground before he could even react. The sharp report of the gun echoed through the neighborhood, bouncing off the houses, awakening the dead silence that once lulled the streets into peace. Ashley screamed, a sound that would haunt the neighborhood for weeks. She ran to the source of the noise, her heart pounding as she found her son lying on the floor, blood spreading like a dark river across the carpet. Her phone slipped from her hand, the line of communication severed as panic consumed her. Neighbors poured into the street. Flashlights cut swaths through the darkness as people tried to understand the chaos unfolding in the house across the way. The police were called, arriving within minutes, their red and blue streaks painting across the wet pavement. Yet even their speed could not erase the devastation already inflicted. Detective Marcus Hall arrived at the scene, his boots crunching against the shattered glass at the front door. Hall had seen countless tragedies in his 15 years on the force, but nothing in his experience could have prepared him for this. The child, barely 12, lifeless on the floor, and a mother screaming in disbelief, clutching a bloody teddy bear, the only witness to a calculated act of rage. The scene was meticulously documented. Hall noted the angle of the shots, the spread of blood, the points of entry. It was clear this was not random, this was personal. And the questions that plagued Hall's mind were simple, yet terrifying. Who, why, and when would they strike again if they weren't stopped? Meanwhile, Rivera was gone. He had vanished into the night, the rain now washing away his footprints. The neighbors could only describe a shadow, a fleeting silhouette that disappeared before anyone could react. Hall knew this would be a long hunt. Rivera was cunning, experienced in manipulation, and driven by a rage that made him dangerous beyond measure. As night bled into early morning, the investigation began in earnest. Officers combed the neighborhood for any sign of Rivera, while detectives traced his recent movements. Surveillance footage from nearby streets showed a black SUV circling the area multiple times in the hours leading up to the shooting. Witnesses recalled a man lurking near the corner store earlier, though no one had thought to suspect him. Ashley sat in a small chair at the local precinct, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and drawn. She could barely speak, only nodding when asked to identify her son's belongings. Detective Hall approached her gently, aware of the fragile state of someone who had just lost everything. She was his mother, Hall thought, and in a moment he was taken from her, taken not by chance, but by someone's deliberate choice. The hunt for Rivera intensified. Tips flooded in, some reliable, some not. Hall traced phone records, vehicle registrations, and social media activity. Rivera's life, once orderly and controlled, began to reveal cracks. There were whispers of prior threats, of obsessive behavior, of a mind spiraling out of control. Each lead brought Hall closer to understanding the monster who committed this unspeakable act. But the case was more complex than it seemed. Rivera's motives weren't simply anger at a breakup. Hall uncovered a series of messages, cryptic and threatening, sent to Ashley over months, escalating in intensity. They hinted at a dark plan, a simmering jealousy, a desire to control or punish beyond reason. And then the first twist hit. In reviewing Rivera's personal effects, Hall discovered a notebook filled with meticulous entries about the family's routine. Each movement of Ashley and Carlos was recorded in detail. The times they left the house, the paths they took, even the patterns of light from the living room window. This was not just a crime of passion, it was premeditated.
By sunrise, Hall and his team had mapped out a timeline. Rivera had parked 2 blocks away, crossed the alley, taken careful aim, and fired multiple rounds into the home. The boy had no chance. The mother had no warning. And yet, as Hall looked at the scene, he realized that Rivera had left something behind, a signature of madness that would become central to the case. It was a small, almost insignificant item, a keychain with a personal engraving, discarded in the garden. Hall picked it up, turning it over in his gloved hands. "He wants us to find him," he muttered. "He wants us to know." And then the final twist that would set the investigation ablaze. As detectives scoured Rivera's vehicle and apartment, they discovered plans for another attack, another family, another target, a continuation of the terror he had just unleashed. Hall's blood ran cold. This was not over. The nightmare was far from complete. As the chapter closed, the detectives realized that Rivera was not just a criminal. They were dealing with a calculating predator, one who had taken his anger and shaped it into a weapon aimed at the innocent. And somewhere, out there in the rain-slicked streets of Cloverleaf, he was still watching, waiting, and planning his next move. The last thing Hall saw before leaving the crime scene was a shadow moving behind the blinds of a neighbor's house. It disappeared before he could focus his flashlight, but he knew one thing for certain. When they caught Rivera, the story would shock the world. And in that quiet, rain-soaked morning, with the city still awakening to the horror of what had occurred, one question hung in the air like smoke. How do you stop a man who has already decided that nothing, not even a child, is untouchable? But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. The day after the shooting, Cloverleaf was a town in shock. Yellow police tape crisscrossed Willow Creek Drive, cordoning off Ashley Fernandez's home like a shrine to tragedy. News crews swarmed the quiet neighborhood, their cameras capturing every tear-streaked face, every whispered question. Why would someone do this? Detective Marcus Hall stood near the scene, watching as forensic teams moved with surgical precision. He had been in law enforcement for over a decade, and he knew the city's worst cases, the murders, the abductions, the violent sprees. But the killing of Carlos Fernandez was different. There was something almost ritualistic in the way it had been executed. Rivera hadn't just wanted to hurt Ashley, he had wanted to destroy everything she loved. Hall's first step was to map Rivera's world. His ex-girlfriend had described him as intense, controlling, and unpredictable, but she could never have imagined he would escalate to this level. Hall and his team began digging into Rivera's recent behavior. They discovered a series of alarming posts on social media, vague threats aimed at Ashley, coupled with cryptic warnings that something bad was coming. Neighbors came forward, recalling Rivera lurking near the school where Carlos attended. He had been asking about schedules, observing playgrounds, and, most unsettling, following the boy at a distance. It painted a terrifying picture of premeditation. Hall felt the weight of it. A predator had been circling, and no one had realized the danger until it was too late. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the crime scene yielded new leads. Gunshot residue on the window frame matched a handgun registered to Rivera's father, but altered to avoid tracing. Fibers from his jacket were found in the shattered glass. The keychain discovered in the garden had his initials engraved, a careless flourish in an otherwise meticulous plan. Rivera was meticulous, obsessive, and increasingly dangerous. Detectives quickly realized they were dealing with a man who had planned not just the murder, but the entire narrative of fear that followed. And if he had another plan, as Hall suspected, they had to act fast. The first breakthrough came from Hall's team interviewing Rivera's friends and acquaintances. Most were terrified, but one man, an acquaintance who had seen Rivera in the days leading up to the shooting, revealed a chilling detail. Rivera said, almost casually, "I'm going to make sure she regrets every day she left me." That statement, once taken in context, painted a horrifying picture. Rivera didn't just want revenge, he wanted control, dominance, and a lasting imprint of terror. As the investigation intensified, Hall began coordinating with Texas Rangers, hoping to prevent any further tragedy. Surveillance cameras, traffic cams, and toll booth records were reviewed. Rivera's black SUV appeared repeatedly near Ashley's home in the weeks before the shooting, confirming the obsessive tracking Hall had suspected. Then, just as the team thought they were gaining ground, Rivera vanished. Every known address, every family member or friend he might contact turned up empty. His phone was disconnected, his social media dormant. Hall felt the unease settle in his chest. They were chasing a ghost. But the first major lead came from an unexpected source, a local pawn shop owner. Rivera had been spotted selling items in the days following the shooting, including clothing and a small handgun case. Hall's team seized the footage and identified Rivera clearly, his face tense, eyes scanning constantly as though expecting someone to follow. In the midst of this chaos, Ashley struggled to process her grief. She moved in with her sister, unable to bear the memories of her home. She described Carlos as a brave little boy, full of life and laughter, someone who loved video games, basketball, and weekend trips to the park. His death was a cruel twist, and Hall could see in her eyes the same question haunting him: why? By the third day, the investigation had begun to uncover Rivera's psychological state. Psychologists consulted by law enforcement described him as exhibiting paranoid obsessive behavior and fixation on perceived injustices. Rivera's notebook, already seized by police, revealed not just the timeline of the shooting, but detailed observations of Ashley's life, as if he had been living vicariously through stalking her family. Then came a call that sent a shockwave through the precinct. Rivera had been spotted crossing the state line. Border Patrol had intercepted a vehicle matching his description, but he was not inside. All that remained was the black SUV abandoned in a remote lot. Inside, detectives found fresh maps of Cloverleaf, surveillance photos of Ashley's house, and a note: "I'll be back when she least expects it." The sense of urgency was palpable. Rivera wasn't just hiding, he was taunting them. Hall knew that to catch him, they needed to predict his next move. He assembled a team to monitor every possible contact, every location Rivera might target. The threat was clear. He was capable of returning to kill again, and no one in the area could feel safe. In a small, dimly lit interrogation room, Hall reviewed the evidence with his team. He said this isn't just murder, it's about fear. Rivera wants control. He wants to make people look over their shoulders every time they hear a car door slam. He's a predator, and predators don't quit. Then the second twist came. Investigators discovered that Rivera had been in contact with someone online, another man who had helped him plan logistics for the shooting. Messages hinted at coordination, not just a lone act. The complexity of the case deepened. Rivera had not acted entirely alone. Detectives began tracing this second person, uncovering a trail of lies, false identities, and temporary housing across multiple counties. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with every lead presenting more questions than answers. Hall feared they might be just scratching the surface of something even more dangerous. Meanwhile, the local community rallied around Ashley. Candlelight vigils, neighborhood patrols, and volunteer watch groups were organized, but Hall knew the reality. Rivera's fixation wasn't deterred by candles or courage. His obsession was a storm, and Cloverleaf was directly in the path. On the fifth day, forensic analysis revealed a shocking fact. A fragment of a bullet lodged in a nearby wall didn't match the gun used on Carlos. Hall felt a chill. Could there have been another shot fired? Another intent to harm? The implications were horrifying. Rivera may not have been alone. Someone else might have been prepared to act simultaneously. As the investigation pressed on, Hall and his team received another anonymous tip. This time, it pointed to a storage unit on the outskirts of Houston. When they arrived, the officers discovered a cache of weapons, ammunition, and detailed logs of Ashley's daily routine. The chilling level of preparation confirmed what Hall had feared. Rivera had meticulously plotted for more than a single act of violence. And yet, Rivera remained elusive. He had vanished into thin air, leaving only fragments of his obsession behind. Every piece of evidence led to more questions, every tip to more terror. By the end of the week, Hall realized something terrifying. We were in a race against a man who had already crossed every boundary of morality, legality, and human decency. Rivera's mind was a labyrinth of rage, and with each passing day, the walls seemed to shift, hiding him from capture. Then, the most unexpected revelation of all. While examining financial records, investigators discovered large cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to the murder. It wasn't just for living expenses. It seemed Rivera had been preparing to disappear completely, a contingency plan if the law caught up to him. But where could he go that law enforcement could not reach? Hall's gut told him that the key lay not in following Rivera geographically, but in understanding his mind. He began consulting criminal psychologists, reviewing similar cases of obsessive, vengeful killers. Every profile pointed to the same pattern. The deeper the personal...
The case had reached a fever pitch. Every lead, every tip, every piece of evidence suggested that they were closing in, but Rivera was always one step ahead. It wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was a psychological game, a deadly chess match, and Hall feared the next move could cost more innocent lives. As Chapter 2 comes to a close, Hall stares at the city lights, a storm of rain gathering on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Rivera's planning, waiting, and watching. And the detectives know one chilling truth. The killer they seek is not only dangerous, he is unpredictable. The final discovery of the chapter leaves everyone stunned. Hidden in a safe deposit box in a nearby town, investigators found photographs of Ashley and Carlos taken over months, annotated with cryptic messages and countdowns. Rivera's obsession had been escalating, and now, for the first time, it became terrifyingly clear that the murder of Carlos was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, Rivera was smiling, knowing they had found only a fraction of his plan. The question now hangs like a blade over Cloverleaf. How do you catch a man who has already decided he cannot be stopped? The hunt was far from over, and the nightmare was about to become even more personal. By the start of Chapter 3, the hunt for Terry Rivera had become a full-scale operation. Law enforcement from multiple counties and the Texas Rangers were collaborating, tracking every lead, every transaction, every movement. The man who had killed Carlos Fernandez was not just dangerous, he was calculating, intelligent, and frighteningly unpredictable. Detective Marcus Hall had spent countless hours studying Rivera's behavior, compiling psychological profiles and coordinating surveillance teams. He knew that Rivera's obsession with Ashley Fernandez was the key to anticipating his moves. But obsession is a twisted logic. It rarely follows predictable patterns, and Hall had to prepare for anything. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local gas station clerk recognized Rivera from a composite sketch circulating online. The clerk described a man in his late 20s, tense, constantly glancing over his shoulder. He had purchased food, clothing, and most notably, a map of a rural area outside Houston. Hall's team quickly traced the route. Rivera was moving, and he was moving with purpose. Surveillance cameras captured him crossing into networks of back roads, far from main highways. His black SUV, the vehicle tied to the murder, had been abandoned weeks earlier, but now he had a new car, rented under a false identity. Rivera was disappearing in plain sight, blending into a world that didn't yet know the monster in its midst. While Hall coordinated field operations, another team analyzed the photographs found in Rivera's safe deposit box. These were chilling. Images of Ashley and Carlos taken months prior, some in public, others inside the house, suggesting he had been stalking them long before the fatal night. Each photograph had a small note scribbled beside it, times, locations, and cryptic symbols. It painted a horrifying picture of premeditation and obsession. The investigators realized that Rivera had planned more than just a single murder. He had meticulously charted Ashley's routines, prepared alternate locations, and even stockpiled weapons for potential future attacks. Every step of the investigation confirmed that Carlos's death, tragic as it was, might have been the first act in a much larger and sinister plan. Hall's team tracked Rivera to an abandoned farmhouse in a rural area outside Houston. It was isolated, surrounded by fields and dense woods, perfect for someone seeking to vanish. Officers set up surveillance, noting movement in and out of the property. At night, shadows flickered across the windows, suggesting someone inside. Inside the farmhouse, Rivera was methodical. He had barricaded doors, covered windows, and laid out supplies as if he were preparing for a siege. Maps and photographs littered the floor. Hall imagined him pacing, planning, waiting for the next move, consumed by rage and obsession. Rivera's mind was a trap, and the detectives knew approaching recklessly could cost lives. The decision was made to surround the property and attempt negotiation before any assault. Texas Rangers, SWAT units, and Hall's team formed a perimeter. Every entrance, every escape route was covered. Hours of tense waiting followed. Rivera, they knew, would not surrender easily. His behavior suggested someone desperate yet controlled, capable of violent resistance if cornered. Then came the first contact. A voice, calm but tense, emerged from a small opening in the farmhouse. "I know why you're here, but it's too late. You'll never understand." Negotiators attempted to reason, but he refused to comply, growing increasingly agitated. Hall listened carefully, analyzing every word. Rivera's language was obsessed, almost theatrical, but beneath the drama was a dangerous unpredictability. Hours passed. Rivera refused to surrender. SWAT prepared for a tactical breach, knowing that time was critical. Any misstep could trigger violence. Hall remembered Carlos, the innocent boy killed through a window, and the urgency intensified. This man could not escape again. The breach came at dawn. Officers moved in silently, securing perimeter points and preparing for forced entry. Rivera had barricaded the main doors, but overlooked a secondary exit, a small window in the back. Hall's team moved with precision, entering the farmhouse while Rivera attempted to flee through the fields outside. The chase was tense and cinematic. Rivera sprinted across muddy terrain, rain-soaked fields slick underfoot. Officers pursued, shouting commands. At one point, he turned, brandishing a handgun, but it misfired. SWAT closed in, tackling him to the ground. Within minutes, he was restrained, handcuffed, and removed from the scene.
Inside the farmhouse, investigators found more evidence than they could process in a day. Weapons caches, maps, photographs, surveillance equipment, and detailed plans for further attacks. The meticulous nature of Rivera's preparation was horrifying. He had not acted impulsively. This was carefully orchestrated, every step designed to inflict terror. Hall reviewed the photographs again, the notes scribbled in margins, the timelines. He realized the depth of Rivera's obsession. It was not just anger or revenge. It was a need to control and dominate, to assert a twisted power over Ashley's life. And if Rivera had not been captured, the consequences could have been far worse. In the interrogation room, Rivera was calm but defiant. Hall and his team began piecing together the psychological profile that had fueled the man's actions. Rivera admitted chillingly that he had planned the murder for months, watching Ashley's every move. He spoke about Carlos almost as an obstacle, a symbol of the family unit he resented. The evidence, confessions, and photographs sealed the case. Hall knew that the courts would see the full extent of Rivera's premeditation and obsession. The sentencing would reflect not just the crime, but the danger he posed to society. A man willing to plan, stalk, and murder to satisfy his twisted sense of revenge.
The trial was intense. The courtroom was packed as forensic experts, law enforcement, and family members testified. Ashley spoke with trembling strength about Carlos, describing the boy's life, his dreams, and the day he was stolen from her. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. Photographs, notes, surveillance footage, forensic analysis, and Rivera's own admissions. In the end, the jury found Rivera guilty of capital murder, and the sentence was severe: 50 years in prison. Justice, while never enough to undo the pain, had been served. The nightmare that had begun with the tragic death of a 12-year-old boy in a suburban Texas home was finally contained. But even in closure, the emotional impact lingered. Ashley mourned Carlos every day, haunted by memories of what was lost and the knowledge of how carefully Rivera had planned the attack. Hall, though relieved at the resolution, carried the memory of the boy and the danger of obsession, an indelible reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed by hatred and fixation. As Chapter 3 closes, the town of Cloverleaf slowly began to heal. The streets, once heavy with fear and silence, regained a semblance of normalcy. Yet the shadow of Rivera's actions would never fully disappear. Families remained vigilant, parents more aware, and the memory of Carlos a sobering reminder of the fragility of safety. And as Hall walked the now quiet streets of the neighborhood, he knew one truth. While this nightmare had ended, the story of obsession, violence, and human darkness would repeat elsewhere. But in this case, justice had finally caught up with the man who had terrorized a family, stolen a child's life, and left a community scarred. The twist, the chilling reminder that leaves viewers unsettled, was subtle yet powerful. Even with Rivera behind bars, the photographs, notes, and obsessive records remained, a testament to a mind consumed by darkness. It was a warning to all. Monsters can hide in plain sight, and vigilance is never optional. The story ends not with fear of the unknown, but with the stark realization that real evil often wears familiar faces. The Cloverleaf neighborhood had returned to a deceptive calm. The yellow crime scene tape was gone, replaced by children cautiously playing on the sidewalks and neighbors nodding at each other with wary smiles. But beneath the surface, the memory of that night lingered like a dark stain. Parents double-checked locks, glanced nervously at passing cars, and whispered warnings to their children. The death of 12-year-old Carlos Fernandez had shaken the community to its core. Ashley Fernandez, now living with her sister, had begun the long, painful process of grieving. Her home, once filled with the sounds of laughter, basketball games, and homework chatter, remained empty. Every photograph of Carlos, every memento, every little item she had tried to tuck away reminded her of the boy she had lost. Therapy, support groups, and family comfort helped, but she understood something haunting. The trauma of losing a child to violence never truly heals. Detective Marcus Hall, meanwhile, reflected on the case with a mixture of relief and unease. Rivera had been captured, the evidence secured, and the community protected, for now. But Hall couldn't shake the realization that someone capable of such obsession and meticulous planning could exist unnoticed anywhere. People think evil announces itself, but it often hides behind normalcy until it strikes. In the weeks following Rivera's arrest, the courtroom drama left its mark. The trial had been exhausting and emotionally draining for all involved. Prosecutors presented each piece of evidence with precision: the photographs, the notes, the surveillance footage, and Rivera's own chilling admissions. The jury deliberated, understanding fully the danger the man posed not just to Ashley and her son, but to society at large. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, 50 years in prison, the courtroom exhaled. Justice, as painful as it was, had been served. Yet the impact of Rivera's actions went beyond the courtroom. Local law enforcement implemented new programs to help families recognize signs of obsession and stalking. Neighborhood watch groups expanded, and schools increased security and awareness programs for students. The tragedy of Carlos Fernandez became a catalyst for change, a grim reminder that vigilance can save lives. But even as the town attempted to heal, questions remained. How had Rivera gone unnoticed for so long? How had his obsession escalated to murder without intervention? And how many other families were unknowingly living under the shadow of someone just like him? The haunting final discovery came months later. While reviewing evidence for the ongoing case, investigators found a hidden compartment in Rivera's abandoned farmhouse. Inside were more photographs, carefully labeled and cataloged, of other families, other homes, and other children. Each had small notes, timelines, and plans. The full scope of Rivera's obsession was terrifying. Carlos's death had been only one part of a much larger pattern, one that could have continued if law enforcement hadn't acted in time. This chilling revelation reminded everyone involved that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for an opportunity. And for those left behind, the scars are both visible and invisible, lasting a lifetime. For Ashley, life became a delicate balance of memory and survival. She spoke publicly about the dangers of stalking and obsession, advocating for stricter laws and more awareness. She wanted other families to understand the risks and protect themselves before tragedy struck. Carlos's memory, while painful, became a symbol of the need for vigilance and the enduring impact of a single life taken too soon. Detective Marcus Hall returned to the streets of Cloverleaf regularly, walking past the house where the tragedy occurred. It was quiet now, almost serene, but Hall knew better. Shadows lingered in the corners of every neighborhood, in the lives of every family, and he understood that his job didn't end with an arrest. Protecting the innocent from men like Rivera was a continuous battle. The final message of this story is clear. Obsession, when left unchecked, can escalate into unimaginable violence. The most horrifying crimes often begin with subtle warnings, stalked steps, cryptic messages, veiled threats, and escalate in ways no one expects. Awareness, vigilance, and swift intervention are the only shields against such darkness. As night falls over Cloverleaf, the streets are quiet, yet a lingering unease remains. The black SUV is gone, the house is silent, and Terry Rivera sits behind bars, serving his 50-year sentence. But the photographs, the notes, the obsessive planning, they all remain, a haunting reminder of the fragility of safety and the chilling depths of human fixation. The story ends here, but the echoes remain. The lesson is terrifyingly simple. Evil doesn't always announce itself. It waits, watches, and strikes when least expected. And for those left behind, the
The scars are both visible and invisible, lasting a lifetime.